Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant Podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. We have an exciting episode today. One of my favorite people. He's been on before, but it's been a while. Russell Moore is editor-at-large and a columnist at Christianity Today. He's the author of Losing Our Religion, an altar call for Evangelical America, which people should go back and listen to the episode we did on that. Russell's an ordained Baptist minister. He served as editor-in-chief of Christianity Today. Before that, he was the president of ethics and of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission at the Southern Baptist Convention. And before that, he was a dean and provost at Baptist Theological Seminary, and on it goes. So, Russell, welcome back to the Remnant.
Oh, thanks for having me. Good to be here.
So, as I was explaining to you before we started recording, the original impetus was I was like, get me Russ Moore, when this controversy broke out about Tucker Carlson and Heritage and this claim that Christian Zionism is biblical heresy, is Christian heresy, which, like, I'm a Jewish guy, but I've been hanging out in right-wing and conservative circles a long time, and this was kind of new to me. I'd been in a lot, and I know some of the arguments at the margins and all this kind of stuff, but the context that it came up in the Heritage meeting was this young person saying, we're not anti-Semitic, we have negative views of Jews because we think Christian Zionism is a heresy. And my biggest problem with that isn't the claim that Christian Zionism is a heresy. That's your business, not mine. It's the idea that you should be mad at Jews for what other Christians believe. So This got very confusing, and I figured you're the guy to ask about this. So take as long as you like. And then we'll get to some other stuff. But that's where I originally was like, break glass in case of emergency and get me Russ Moore, when this controversy first erupted.
Well, I mean, Christian Zionism is not a heresy. It's not even really definable because people are using just ridiculously different categories when they even talk about it. So it's kind of like language of separation of church and state. I believe strongly in separation of church and state. Roger Williams and so forth is in all our confessions of faith. But a lot of times when kind of a secular progressive says separation of church and state, what he or she typically means is your religious views don't have anything to do with your opinions about. So if you end up with, Martin Luther King as a Christian nationalist theocrat, then the definition doesn't work. And Christian Zionism is the same thing. I mean, so if people are saying, I think the way some people are getting to heresy is by suggesting that it's the idea that Christians come to God through Jesus Christ and Jews come through another different covenant, which is not mainstream Christian theology or biblical Orthodox Christian theology. But that's not what most people mean by Christian Zionism. Most of the time it means Christians who support Israel having a place in the land in the Middle East, and for different reasons. I mean, you've got just vastly different motivating factors for Christians who support that to support it. And so you might have one person who will say, I'm for that because of biblical prophecy. Temple's going to be rebuilt. We need to have red heifer. I mean, there are those kinds of people out there. And then you also have people who are saying, look, Jewish people are critically important to God. Jesus is a Jew. Israel is the means through which the Jewish people have been protected from annihilation since the Holocaust. And Israel is a democratic ally. We support them. I mean, those are just very different kinds of motivations.
Yeah, I mean, like when I hear Christian Zionism, most of the Christians I've known who are Zionists, the Zionism is, I mean, I've definitely known people of the biblical prophecy type, and a lot of my left wing friends would be like furious that that's the wrong reason to support Israel. And I was like, really? We're going to get into people's motives? Like, I'd rather them support Israel for the wrong reasons than not support Israel for some other reasons.
Right.
But for the most part, most of the supposed Christian Zionists I know, the term Christian Zionist to me is sort of like Christian Shriner or Christian baseball player, right? You're a baseball
Yeah.
player who's Christian. Zionist kind of means I support Israel and its right to exist, and I'm a Christian, so I'm a Christian Zionist. And it's not a statement of theology. And it feels like this is one of those things that just sort of, an enormous number of phrases and terms in public life and intellectual life start as insults.
Yeah.
And then they get embraced by people. And
Yeah.
this feels a little bit like that. Is like Tucker Carlson calls it a brain virus, and he wants to call people Christian Zionists. And so some people are leaning into it and saying, no, I really am a Christian Zionist. But what is the actual, I use the word official advisedly, and you can correct me as you wish, but what is the official Baptist or Protestant or Christian view? I mean, I know there are different denominations and all that, about the existence of Israel and to what extent Jews play a role in the theology of Christianity today.
Well, I mean, I think a lot of that's going to be generational. Because if you look at there's a system of thought called dispensationalism that kind of is familiar in American pop culture through the Left Behind movies and books and those kinds of things, which tends to spike and then go away for periods of time, or to kind of go underground for periods of time. That has a really detailed sort of place for Israel in Bible prophecy. And what we've seen over the past, maybe 50 years is this joining together of that kind of view of prophecy with prosperity gospel type Pentecostalism. John Hagee and people like that. So if you go into a church that has an Israeli flag, you're definitely in kind of a Pentecostalish Christian Zionist sort of place. If there's a shofar, it's going to get really weird. I mean, so that's kind of that. But then there's everything else along with it. What I've noticed is it's very, very hard to find somebody who holds to that kind of theology under the age of 50. I
Is that
wouldn't.
right? Okay.
I'm not sure I could do it. If you told me, find a Bible prophecy Christian Zionist right now who's 40 years old, I'm not sure I could do it.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the shofar thing. I had completely forgotten. A few years ago, I was driving through downtown Washington, and some young people were leaning out their car windows blowing shofars. And I was like, this is the wrong time of year for that.
Was it January 6th?
I can't remember what, but it was very weird. It was like it's like a shofar for listeners who don't know, it's like a ram's horn that uses a horn, during Yom Kippur to atone, and it's a very Jewish, very random kind of thing to see people out on the street with. It's sort of like seeing people on the street with a Torah. It's just like not something you would expect to see. So, all right, so we can get off of the Jewish thing in a second, but I was just going through. Yair Rosenberg at the Atlantic has this piece summing up a lot of the recent public surveys and polling, public opinion. That's the word I was looking for. And there really is a major generational split. It's much less of a left-right thing than a young-old thing, in that there are a lot young people skew. The majority of young people are not anti-Semitic in America, but the majority of anti-Semites in America are young. And are you seeing that? What is your explanation for why that would be?
What I see is that if you take kind of a typical 22-year-old evangelical Christian, he or she might fit into one of three camps. So you might have somebody who just isn't interested in Israel, in those kinds of conversations. They see it as something kind of outdated. It's sort of a Mike Huckabee era kind of thing. Not really for them. It's not that they have a strong position one way or the other. They just don't really think about it. Then you'll have kind of your center left sorts of evangelicals, kind of social justice oriented evangelicals, who tend to be pro-Palestinian. Tend to have, there are programs such as Christ at the Checkpoint that will take people to Palestinian territories, show them things that have happened, spend a lot of time talking to Palestinian Christians. Sometimes these are people who are connected to Palestinian Christians, and so they're hearing kind of directly from them what their experience is like. And then you would have sort of your Christian nationalist kind of evangelical, almost always male. And for some of those guys, I mean, this is kind of the Tucker Carlson type thing that you're seeing. I mean, Tucker Carlson is unique. We're not used to Episcopalians telling people what heresy is. I mean, that just doesn't usually happen. So, but when you've got when you've got that group, sometimes there's a kind of an inner struggle as to who they hate the most. Israelis or Palestinians, because you have a lot of the anti-Semitism coming in through the side door with that, but you also have anti-Muslim sentiment, and sometimes that's kind of wrestling itself out in some weird ways. So it's kind of the mirror image where you have, you might have two Christians who support Israel, one for kind of pragmatic sorts of reasons and the other for Bible prophecy. You kind of have the other thing when it comes to bigotries. You might have people who are anti-Israel for completely different sorts of reasons. And then I think I would add to it, I think that's gotten a lot more complicated since in the years since October 7th, because there is this sort of wrestling with, well, I'm anti-Hamas, but does that mean I have to be pro-Netanyahu?
Right.
And what does that mean? So that's part of it too.
So, when your book came out, and we talked last time, it felt like the Christian nationalism merger with MAGA and the GOP stuff was really on an ascendant path. And by no means do I think that stuff has completely gone away. You can't be in the line of work that we're in that not see evidence of it. But it does feel like it's abated. It does feel like, at least from where I'm sitting, I see less of it breaking through. And I'm wondering if that's just because I'm not paying attention to the right things, or do you feel like it's still on the rise? The sort of the Christian nationalist, however, whatever labels you want to put on it. And we should be clear, prosperity gospel stuff is not Christian nationalism. It's a different thing, I would say.
The Venn diagram tends to overlap sometimes, but
for sure, right. But so sort of let's just call this a checkup. Since the book came out, are you feeling better, worse, the same?
Worse.
How do you think? Okay, worse.
I do think it's on the rise, and for a couple of reasons. One of those reasons being what I was reading a couple months ago back through a David Frum essay that he wrote during the Bush administration, where he was kind of talking about some of his frustrations with evangelicals in the coalition, because he said evangelicals tend to think that losing means we deserve to lose, and winning means we deserve to win. And so you have this kind of moral category of winning that has been adopted by Christian nationalist types, who will say we want to impose our our structures upon everybody else, and that's how we win. And anybody who's not for that is defeatist. So that takes a particularly entrepreneurial kind of personality. And the normies are the people who really want people to get along. They don't want their churches divided because they really do care about those institutions. So they tend to go quiet. And they tend to go quiet the more that it advances along. And there's just a lot of market opportunity in an attention economy for saying crazy things and out crazying each other. And that's what you've seen lately is with a lot of people who, I'm kind of building my platform by saying really edgy sorts of things. And then the next generation down comes in and says, okay, well, I'll one up you on that. We'll deny the Holocaust. We'll not just kind of hint around that maybe the Holocaust. We'll just come right out and say it. And that's going to bring attention, not just from kind of attracting groyper adjacent type people and Christian nationalists. It's also going to have people denouncing it and quote tweeting it, which also is going to help to build the brand. So that's kind of where we are right now. And you have this kind of there's a lot of this would never happen in a church. If you went to a typical evangelical church and you kind of pulled somebody out and said, hey, what are all the awful things you think about the late Tim Keller? Nobody's going to have anything awful to say. But if you go to one of these online Christian nationalist influencer things, part of what they do is to try to one up each other on how much they can insult the late Tim Keller. Because Keller was actually wanting to persuade people and to talk to people and say, hey, look, we may disagree on all these other things, but let's just consider this question of God. Let's talk about this for a few minutes. And that's just so utterly alien to this kind of market. And so that's why you'll have that language of it's kind of been picked up from the secular sort of far right, but is very common now in these Christian nationalist circles of you don't know what time it is. And so which is such a, I mean, that's a ridiculous sort of argument anyway. It especially is when you're talking about Christians. To say, well, the movement of history has put us in this time where this is true because of the time period we're in. I mean, but that's increasingly common. I would be hard pressed, just like I'd be hard pressed to find you a 25-year-old dispensationalist. I would be really hard pressed to find you a 25-year-old Christian nationalist woman who's not an internet influencer.
All right, so this is really interesting to me. I want to be clear. It's very rare on this podcast that I have a guest on who says things are worse than I think they are. So, but I know all about the know what time it is stuff, and I got all sorts of problems with those guys. But I was just referring to the explicitly Christian wing of this. It felt like it had gone a little more quiet, but apparently I'm not paying attention. But the way you're describing the general dynamic of the influencer universe, I totally see that. I mean, what's happened to Tucker? I was friends with Tucker. I've known Tucker for over 30 years. It is tragic to me how he's disgraced himself. And but I guess so part of my question is, I agree with you that influencer, infotainment, conspiracy theory world has gotten worse. It's metastasizing. And I guess it makes sense that a big component of it would be coded Christian nationalist. And I'm not really seeing it as much as I should. But, there are these reports that came out recently that a lot of Nick Fuentes' following is sort of a mirage. Foreign bot farms, all that kind of makes total sense. A lot of the I don't want to sound like a Russia guy because I think a lot of this is coming from China and Qatar and not Russia. But I think there is a certain amount of dismissal of the fact that foreign actors are screwing with us. And I mean, people forget that the Protocols of Elders of Zion is one of the first and most successful propaganda psyops in history, where they deliberately did it to discredit democracy, and the Russians peddled it all out there as a propaganda thing. And I think that model has continued with a lot of countries screwing with us through social media. And so, you know, I guess the part of my question is, if all of this stuff that we're seeing in the social media space, including on the Christian national side, I have friends who do polling and they'll put in questions about various things, and they can't find a lot of evidence that like Fuentes is actually influential, so that it shows up among electorates, which doesn't mean he's not influential, but it's right. What is the evidence that these people who are doing this stuff that offends you for all the right reasons, what is the evidence that they're having a real world impact in communities, in churches, in religion, in public religion generally, or is it all purely an online phenomenon?
Well, I mean, look, for instance, at members of the Trump administration who are members of these denominations and these movements that are explicitly Christian nationalist in a way that would have been politically toxic before. I mean,
That's a good point.
there have been people who've been appointed, by Mitch McConnell or George W. Bush to the International Commission on the Commission on International Religious Freedom, and then somebody sees they made a statement against the Ground Zero mosque, something like that. Oh no, we can't. I mean, that person now is toxic. I mean, we're so far past that right now. And the other thing is, what I worry about, and this is one of the reasons why this is a problem and why it is growing, is because so many normie evangelicals say, oh, well, this is just all online. It doesn't it doesn't show up in churches. But they don't understand how things work right now. Something can be a mirage, and that's how it finds its way into the real world. Is so you have some people. I see a lot of evangelicals who are not taking seriously this hard right, I mean, completely incompatible with Christianity kind of Nietzsche stuff happening among young men, particularly not all young men, but by a segment of young men, because they do two things. Either they say, oh, well, they don't matter because there's not enough of them that are out there, not knowing. I mean, evangelicalism is very faddish in a way that has done great things and a way that has done terrible things. And this can do that. Or they think there's too many of them. And so you'll hear this argument a lot, which is to say, well, because all of these young men are involved in this, we have to meet them where they are. So they have this sort of what we would have previously laughed at as a lefty mainline Protestant sort of attitude. Well, here's where people are. Let's just love them through it. That kind of an attitude, one or the other, and that means the Overton window just keeps getting blown out the other side constantly. Do I think that's an ever expanding sort of thing? No, but it's really, really hard to draw this back. And I'm actually not so much worried about Christian nationalism getting bigger and bigger and bigger until it takes over the country, as I am people starting to conclude, well, Christian nationalism is what Christianity is, or what religion is. And that's going to have all kinds of bad implications.
See, it's funny because that is a perfectly analogous thing to my obsession with how people are starting to think that this stuff is what conservatism is. Right. It's sort of, and, and we talk about it a lot here at the Dispatch, is about, should we just stop talking about how we're conservative? Because you tell people who love MAGA that we're conservatives, they go, you're lying, you're rhino squish, whatever. And you tell normie left of center people, and even some right of center people that you're conservative, they think you're all on Team MAGA, because
Right.
the term has just been so redefined that, and it breaks my heart,
Mm-hmm.
because I think a lot of this stuff is not, in fact, conservative. It is horseshoe theory. Like, if you spent your life thinking that industrial policy was folly, or nationalizing industries was folly when the left did it, why does it become a great idea when the right does it? And yet that's sort of where we are, as long as Trump is taking out stakes in corporations and doing
Right.
protectionism, then it's brilliant. But
Mm-hmm.
but we can take an ownership stake in Intel, and that's awesome. But we also get to demonize Zoran Mondani as a socialist. Well, pick a lane.
Right. Right.
I'm for condemning socialists, but
Yeah.
you can't be one while you're doing it.
Right.
And and I agree with you very much about how the mirage thing can be an excuse for not taking stuff seriously that is really misguided. I'll give you an example. JD Vance has made it clear that he's going to run political cover for these sort of, Fuentes adjacent kind of, let's
Mm-hmm.
play games with Nazi language and racism and sexism and all these kinds of things. And that this is, kids being kids, even though a lot of these people were professional 20 and 30 somethings,
Mm-hmm.
and he defends it all. I think that's a huge political mistake. But the fact that he doesn't, and he's not dumb, and he doesn't have dumb people around him, tells you something about what he sees in the party.
Right.
And if the administration acts as if the online world is real, to a certain extent, it makes it real because
Exactly.
of who they reward and who they don't, and who they bring into the coalition and who they kick out.
Yeah, exactly. And that's true too. When you go down to, if you talk to Capitol Hill staffers, the percentage that Rod Dreher reported was
Exaggerated.
too high, but
Yeah.
but there's a lot more of it than you would have ever seen at any time before,
Yeah.
because there's such a the attitude that some of these really young right-wing people have toward the people they work for is almost like what you saw in the Democratic Party in the 70s with Joe Biden, working with Jim Eastland and these old segregationist Democratic Southern Democrats. Okay, they're here. Bless their hearts. They're not going to be here long.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to get along with them. We're going to, do what we can do with them, and then they're going to be gone, and they're not making new ones.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of the attitude that's present there. And when you have such an old, decrepit kind of Congress, sometimes metaphorically and sometimes literally, they often are just clueless as to what's happening underneath their feet.
So what would you do about it?
Well, I think you have to have people who take it seriously, and that's the incentive structures are just so different, because I think the problem here is psychological. So, for instance, I can think about if I'm in a church where maybe 90% of the people, good, normie, regular sort of Christians, I've got 10% that are wacko, involved in whatever kind of conspiracy theory that's there. Here's the problem: you're gonna you can either just kind of ignore it, and then it keeps growing and getting more and more extreme, or if you confront it, the problem you're going to have is with the normies. Because they're going to be saying, "Oh, don't give that any attention, or just give them a little bit of what they want, and then it'll come back." So this is kind of what I have to have this conversation with pastors all the time, because they're trying to think about, well, what do I do? They've got this group of people in their congregation who will say, it's become kind of a cliche now, whenever something happens, if your pastor doesn't talk about fill in the blank this Sunday, you need to find a new church. So they'll hear all of this stuff, and they'll say, "Well, maybe what I need to do is I need to get up and I need to talk about it in a way that's going to satisfy those people, and then we can move on and get back to normal business." And what I'll say is no, because the minute that you do that, now you've set a precedent that you're going to have an immediate response to whatever thing is traveling through the internet, and that means the next thing that happens, your silence is deafening, is what you're going to hear, because you're choosing now. You're now making an active choice as to what not to speak about or what to speak about later. And even when you do it, if you don't speak about it with the requisite amount of anger or the requisite amount of time, and so you end up in a situation where they can't even preach anymore. They can't even pastor a church anymore because they're trying to appease this. That I see that happening in all kinds of different tribal configurations, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah. No, it's funny. I just wrote about this. I mean, in the context of this polling about anti-Semitism and young people, I've been writing for 30 years that the left has this unhealthy obsession with the idea that youth is inherently more noble, more idealistic, wiser. Right? There's this great line in "It Takes a Village" by Hillary Clinton where she says, "Some of the greatest theologians I've ever met have been 5-year-olds." And I mean, you get what she's trying to say, right?
Right.
Kids sometimes stumble on really interesting insights because they come to things with fresh eyes, Emperor's New Clothes, and all that. But kids also say a lot of really stupid things because they're kids, right? And I've got nothing but grief for 30 plus years from sort of baby boomer liberals for saying this generational stereotyping is analytically wrong, right? It's also philosophically really problematic. Young people can be young people historically can be revolutionaries, they can be violent, they can be dangerous. You can't also just it's against the American creed to lump people into categories rather than to judge them as individuals. I mean, there are a whole bunch of reasons, but the baby boomer nostalgia for the 1960s and the Just So stories have been such that they just can't understand why I'm doing it. And now I get the same thing from the people on the right.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't understand. Young people, they see a different world. And like, young people have specific problems I'm totally sympathetic to. Let's do something about housing and all these kinds of things. But just because young people are more anti-Semitic now doesn't mean I have to be like, oh, I think anti-Semitic's a little less wrong. This is not a democratic small d question, right? It's either some things are right, some things are wrong. If more people say 2 + 2 is 5 to the point where they become a constituency, shame on the politician that treats them as a constituency rather than the politician who says, 2 + 2 is not 5, it's 4. And it's just another example of the sociology of the horseshoe stuff where the right is doing the things that the left used to do.
Yeah, and if you look at it, there's a similar mentality from the left of the 1960s that says we can harness all this energy and manpower without actually turning over the reins to these people. And so you end up with the people who are kind of playing around with this. They're all ending up Hubert Humphrey at the end. I mean, where you're having eggs thrown at you and you're saying, well, what happened? I'm the one who brought you all into this coalition, but you're not radical enough. And that's happening right now.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Like, there's a big point in my first book is that in the 1960s, the people, the hard left, the radical left, the Weather Underground types, all this, even the SDS, the people they hated were liberals.
Right.
They kind of ignored conservatives because they were just sort of like, those people on the other side, they're not part of our conversations. And now, like, the people who, the people get the most hate are you, me, David French. I mean, it's not just us. I don't want to be solipsistic. Ben Sass. You can go down this long list of people who actually care about processes and norms and this kind of stuff. They're the sellouts, and the people who are in the bidding war for radicalism are the heroes. And
we're actually even further down the road than that, because a lot of the ones who were leading the way to say let's take on these sellouts are now at the point where they're being called sellouts. Because there's a point which you just won't I mean, these guys just, a lot of them anyway, are just not going to say, okay, the 19th Amendment needs to be taken away because women can't be trusted.
Right.
Even if they kind of think that,
Right.
they're not habituated to say something like that.
Yeah.
And so once you don't, well, that's proving that you're not really with the tribe. And if you don't talk about, if you don't at least kind of edge your way out into the anti-Semitism stuff, because a lot of this is being done, especially in the evangelical case, but it's elsewhere too. A lot of it is done with this kind of jokey sort of way, where you can use these sorts of buzzwords, HH in a sentence or something like that, and then when someone calls you on, what are you talking
Right.
about?
You can
I
run for
just
cover. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
and oh, you just don't have a sense of humor. We're just joking, but it can be this bat signal to everyone else. Hey, I'm really with you. And the people who kind of brought us to this point don't know how to do that, or won't do that, and they're being savaged.
Mm-hmm. All right. So this got more political than I intended, and I want to move this slightly a little bit more back towards the theological point, but staying on the politics a little bit too. So I think I probably mentioned this to you before. I've made this point a bunch of times on the podcast. When I was doing my deep dive into the early 20th century, late 19th century intellectual history, one of the things I learned, I think first from Julian Benda, who wrote this book, Treason of the Intellectuals or Treason of the Clerks, is that a real tell about Christians being seduced by an ideology is when they would start making statements about how Jesus was the first this or the first that, right? So Jesus was the first eugenicist, and they quote some metaphor he used about gardens, or Jesus was the first socialist, or Jesus was the first nationalist. And it's a sign, maybe not in every instance, but it is a sign of how you're bending the faith to the political agenda kind of thing. And so it's counterintuitive to a lot of my more secular friends that the best safeguard against religion going bad is actually a more dogmatic commitment to the actual faith than this blending, right, of getting the peanut butter of secularism into the chocolate of faith is where you get the problem, right? And so at the Charlie Kirk funeral, Donald Trump rejected this thing that I kind of thought was sort of unrejectable in plain Christian language about forgiveness, right? Maybe not, maybe too soon to forgive Charlie Kirk's murderer, but it was Erica Kirk did something really wonderful and beautiful there when she did that, and I salute her for it. But he wasn't even talking about the murderer. He was just talking about people who don't like him, which we saw evidenced again with the Rob Reiner stuff.
Yeah.
Is the idea that Trump is a good Christian, is that still something that anybody tries to make? Or is it they're just he's our pagan shield, and he's our King Cyrus or whatever, and people just don't care anymore? Or is it they can't see it anymore?
Well, for the people who are really on board, I never hear the pagan shield stuff anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, that you did for a long time, Cyrus, and all that kind of thing. And oh well, he's not a pastor, but he's this. I never hear that anymore.
Yeah.
Instead, he has for those people become actually a representation of Christianity. Now they'll say he's not theologically where we want him to be. He's not, but he is with us. That's the sort of language that you hear now, and you don't hear a lot about Jesus. So in any of these contexts, you listen to these podcasts, you go to these churches and what have you. Jesus shows up only when absolutely necessary, and usually as a means of atonement, means of a way to God. But you don't want to talk about what Jesus actually said. So it's kind of the mirror image of the old 20th century liberalism, which was to say, let's talk about what Jesus said, but let's not ever talk about what he did. We don't want to talk. We don't want to get embarrassed by virgin births and miracles and resurrections from the dead. We can't believe any of that. Let's just talk about what he said. Now you have the exact reverse, which is to say, okay, we'll talk about the second coming, but let's not really get into the details of who it is. That's when it becomes second. I mean, that's where it becomes difficult.
Yeah, I sometimes get the sense that and I don't want to, like, I've grown up professionally around sincere believing Christians. I spent years defending evangelical Christians and religious and doctrinaire Catholics, and I still have an enormous respect for people of faith. And so I don't want to paint with too broad a brush, but there are certain people on the internet that when they do the Christ is King thing, it feels like they care more about the word king than Christ.
Oh, absolutely.
There's this dominance thing. Our guy is sovereign over your guys, and it's sort of Curtis Yarvin adjacent about monarchism and all this kind of stuff.
Right.
And it feels like we don't actually believe the Christ part too much, but it's a great thumb in the eye of people who are offended by it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and what you were talking about earlier reminds me of Karl Barth, most significant Christian theologian of the 20th century by almost any measure, said one time, and it gets misunderstood all the time when people look at it. He's training a group of preachers who were in the confessing church under Hitler. And he said, I want to teach you to preach as though nothing has happened. And some people look at that and say, oh, well, what he means is just ignore and just kind of have this spiritual piety. I mean, Karl Barth didn't think that. He's taking on Hitler constantly and training people to take on it. What he meant was, okay, look at what happens when you've got a religion that's being hollowed out by political authoritarianism, and little by little things are being thrown overboard. Old Testament, you just keep going, ethics of Jesus, all that stuff. We're gonna teach and train ourselves to actually believe our faith as though nothing has happened at all. And then out of that, we actually are going to speak to this and to say this is important because we take it so seriously. And that's what the problem is with any of these movements that keep trying to take over these religious categories, whether they're left, right, whatever. They don't take the faith seriously. It's just a means to an end. And the people who actually think, okay, I really think this is true, and not only that, I think it's the most important thing in the cosmos. You have to then say, hey, you can't do that. You can't turn Jesus into a Nazi mascot because we actually think Jesus is alive. I mean, that's the problem. And so when you've got people who are really, really passionate about whatever, but could care less about the actual faith, you're going to end up with all the zeal of dogmatism, but without the actual transformation of life.
So, I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question. I just did a podcast with a historian who wrote a biography of John Adams, and we talked about this a little bit an hour ago. But and I've talked about it a bunch of other times on here. I still think left and right are useful concepts, but I think they're less useful than they used to be.
Yeah.
And so it's not purely a horseshoe theory kind of point, but I've argued for a long time that sort of the left has this autoimmune problem where we attack healthy institutions the way if you have an autoimmune disease, you attack healthy organs as if they're invaders. And I always hesitate about this argument because it sounds like I'm blaming the left for all the problems on the right. And what I'm trying to make the argument for is that it's less of a left-right problem than a modernity problem. A lot of the people who say terrible things on the internet or on these dumb podcasts, what they're really looking to do is be transgressive, to find something that people actually value and attack it so they can get a reaction for it.
Right.
No one gets offended if I attack Odin, right?
Right.
No one really gets all that offended if I attack Unitarians.
Yeah.
But attacking Jesus or attacking the Jews, there are very few taboos left. And any taboo that you can get attention for overthrowing or attacking gets attention. And we've gotten into a system, and I think it's a modern problem more than a left-right problem, where we confuse fame for honor, where we confuse attention for importance. And you just see it's how it's corrupted people like Candace Owens, you know. And I think we saw, because, and again, I'm not trying to blame the left for it. I think we saw it first on the left because the left, in a very sort of obvious kind of way, is more modern in the sense that it rejects the past, it rejects tradition, so it's going to be on the bleeding edge of things. But the right now is, you know, there's a reason why Jeffrey Hirsch, in his book about Nazis, he calls them reactionary moderns. The right is it's following a very modern playbook of sort of nihilistic, anti-normative, anti-nomian, anti-institution. You know, the post-liberals want to attack the concepts of the creedal nation. They want to attack the idea that the founders were onto anything. It's an autoimmune problem on the right that I'm used to attacking on the left, but I'm increasingly thinking right and left are not the most important considerations here, and it feels like there's a similar thing going on with the church.
Yeah, and if you see the trajectory of it in terms of the church, I mean, where one of the ways that this showed up on the left was in the early to middle 20th century. You had a lot of liberal Protestant preachers who were building churches and institutions. I mean, Harry Emerson Fosdick, Norman Vincent Peale. I mean, you just go through a whole list of these people, and then there came a point where you started to realize, oh, wait a minute, there are very few of those people left anymore, and a lot of them are political activists. Or I could go to some of these very liberal seminaries and say, okay, who's training for the pastorate? Nobody. Everybody's training to be chaplains, hospital chaplains, or counselors, but that's it. Similar thing happening now on the right, where with this kind of attention economy, the incentives aren't there to actually lead a bunch of people to faith in Christ, build a great church. You know, so I mean, when I was a seminary dean, I used to worry about the ambition of some of these people who really want to build a church into a mega church, and you know, win a bunch of converts to Christ to build up their own brand or whatever. I long for those days. I mean, that's oh Bambi, how naive you were, because now that's not even the ambition. These are people who aren't preachers. As a matter of fact, I've started to see now in just recent days, some of these people, they're ridiculing. It's not just that they have very thin biblical literacy; they're ridiculing the people who do. And say, well, that's because you're not focused on what matters. I mean, that's a very big shift in 20 years' time.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, I had Jesse Arm, this guy from the Manhattan Institute, recently to talk about a big survey of Republicans that he did. We don't need to get in the weeds on it, but he said a lot of things I kind of disagreed with. Some I thought were on the too bless your heart hopeful side, and some I just thought were analytically I come to different conclusions. But anyway, it was an interesting conversation. But one of the things he was very hopeful for was, because where I agree with a lot of people, is the best thing that could happen to this country is a healthy religious awakening of some kind. You know, and so I'm down with that. But he was of the mind that Erica Kirk and Turning Point could lead such a thing. And I don't want to beat up on Erica Kirk. She's a widow. She's been put through something terrible. I had my disagreements with Charlie Kirk. It's amazing that a couple months ago to say even that was something that would get you death threats and hate mail.
Right.
But celebrating the death of the murder of Rob Reiner is just totally fine. But the point is, I am, for the reasons I suggested before about the politicization of religion, I am very skeptical that Turning Point and Erica Kirk can lead that effort. They could be helpful to it conceivably, but I feel like the way that Turning Point approaches religion on campuses, codes or indexes, however you want to put it, reads as a very politicized form of Christianity, which I don't think is good for politics, and I don't think is necessarily good for Christianity.
Right.
How do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I haven't heard them aspire to do that, to lead the religious awakening. But no, I don't think you can have political organizing groups lead revival. I mean, because to go back again to the example from the left, I mean, what do we see? Anytime that the religion becomes centered around politics, people eventually realize, I don't have to give up a Sunday morning for this. And you end up secularizing, or in some cases on the right, paganizing. And I mean that literally, paganizing. So I don't think that can happen. When it comes to the religious awakening, the revival piece of it, one of the things I've noticed is one of the most controversial things I can possibly say now in a Christian context is for people to say, what do you think about the great revival that's happening across the United States right now? And when I say, well, let's wait and see if that happens. I hope so. I hope that, but we don't have any data to show that yet. I mean, we have data that shows that the secularization has stalled, has kind of reached a bottom point, but we're not seeing church attendance the way that a revival would suggest. We're not seeing conversions in the way that a revival would suggest yet. And so now maybe a lot of times those things are happening really at a almost invisible sort of level, but they're not here yet. And the reason I think why even just saying, well, let's pray for that and hope for that, but let's not declare it yet. One of the reasons that's so offensive to people is for the very thing I mentioned earlier, where if there's a religious revival, that proves we're right and we're on the winning side, which again is not a Christian ethic of things at all, and never has been. And there's almost this psychology right now, and I think it transcends all kinds of categories, where you can either. It's kind of. I met this guy one time who had been a roadside psychic long ago before he became a Christian. And he said it's really easy to do because all you have to do is either tell people really, really good news or really, really bad news. So if you tell them something great is heading for you, love, success, whatever, they'll keep coming back. And if you tell them, oh, there's something horrible out there in your future, they'll keep coming back in order to help you navigate them through that. What you can't do is anything in the middle, which is, of course, what real life is.
Right.
You've got some great things happening and some dark things happening, and people can't handle that. But I mean, a Christian view of history is there's light and darkness in every generation, manifests itself in different ways, but God's grace is always active, and human beings are always sinful. And the structures they build are going to be sinful. And so that kind of complication, 21st century America finds difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. I recently had Rahm Emanuel on here, and I don't normally have politicians, and I'm not going to make a habit of it. But I draw some encouragement from the fact that he is leaning wholeheartedly into age restrictions for social media.
Yeah.
And I am very much in favor of it. Got to work out some technological issues, and court's going to have to look fine. But and It's funny, in my experience, just talking to a lot of secular, a lot of liberal, a lot of conservative moms and parents in the last couple of weeks about this. It's a bad analogy, but it kind of gets at the point. The Whig Party could not survive because half of them were pro-slavery and half of them were anti-slavery. And once slavery became the central issue, the coalition no longer worked. I kind of feel like that nexus of online gambling, online porn, and social media for kids is the kind of thing that could create a coalition that kind of shatters one or both of these parties if it's put in the right way. And it feels to me like that is the place where religious leaders could really make a meaningful contribution.
I totally agree with you on that. I mean, when I had Jonathan Haidt on my show the first time, and he starts talking about smartphone things, he gives practical suggestions as to what schools could do. This was the most kind of immediate effect that I've ever seen with all the kind of messages we all send out in the bottle. Because I'm immediately hearing from Christian schools, they're saying, "Oh, wait, we can do that."
Right.
Because he said, here's what's going to happen. If you say you can't bring schools to class, you're going to get complaints from parents saying, what if there's a school shooting?
Right.
And you're not going to hear from the 90% of parents who are actually grateful for it. And you're not going to hear from the 10% even are eventually going to be great. So just do it and see what happens. And they did. And it has ended up completely transforming what they're doing. I completely think that's the case. And part of what I'm trying to do is to keep evangelicals from, because there's a mindset that says, well, one of the things we do, and it's true, is we take whatever technology is available and we use it for kingdom ends. So Martin Luther in the printing press, Billy Graham in the radio and television, all the way through. Let's design Jesus chatbots that let people, converse back and forth with an AI Christ. I mean, that's disastrous.
Yeah.
And so that kind of mindset we have to, or these programs that follows what Bible references you're reading in order to try to sell you products about whatever it is you care about. I mean, all of that could be completely disastrous. But if you have a group of people who are saying, okay, we're entering an era where everybody's confused about even what does it mean to be a human being, that's actually something we've been thinking about for thousands of years and can speak to, and don't just try to mimic it and keep up with it. I do think there's an opportunity there.
And also, like, it's funny, when we were looking for grade school for my daughter, the headmaster gave this little impromptu talk about their educational philosophy, because every other private school in DC that we looked at, they thought their comparative advantage, right, not just what was good about the school, but what made them better than the other schools, was their commitment to diversity and DEI and the commitment to social justice stuff. And it's like, I always said, like, diversity is fine to have on a checklist, but tell me about the gym, right? I mean, there's other things on my list.
Yeah.
And then the headmaster that we saw of the school that we sent her to, he said, look, we care a lot about education, but the most important thing we think is to guarantee that your kid has a childhood. Like we want to delay, like we only go through 6th grade here. We want to delay the stuff that's inappropriate for kids beyond 6th grade until they leave 6th grade and have a childhood. And I think that message, sort of, which can be connected to free range kids and all sorts of other kind of, it could be related to all sorts of religious instruction, but all that kind of stuff. The joyousness and innocence of childhood is a thing that is so transpartisan.
Yeah.
That it is and I normally do not like, I always thought the Children's Defense Fund was this backdoor way of sort of just increasing wealth in the welfare state. But this is different because it really does invade people's homes. And I just feel like the right politician with the right valence and pitch for this kind of message could cut through in an enormously powerful way. And I feel like religious people, that this is their sweet spot. If you want to talk about getting involved in public policy, it's the temptations of, addiction. And, this, and the place where I wish you guys were better is, and I've written about this a bunch, is about the seduction of crowds, the seduction of mass politics, which is a form of transcendence, but a bad form of transcendence, or can be. But anyway, I'm just rambling here, but I really think that that's there's so much low hanging fruit there.
But where we're really good is actually dealing with addiction and people whose lives have been, and now we have such a range of people who are not just addicted to whatever, but are actually exhausted by it.
Yeah.
And I think that actually could be an opportunity.
In a weird way, a lot of people are addicted to being addicted.
Yeah.
Right? Addicted just to they need the next thing that fills the holes in their souls for the next 10 minutes, because that's the attention economy stuff kicking in. And I don't know, it feels like religious leaders are the people to go to for fixing some of that.
Yeah. Thomas Merton, a Catholic monk in the 60s, I reread it the other day. He has this passage about the artificial tension that comes with exciting the nervous system. He's talking about radio and newspapers, this book, but exciting the nervous system until they're stripped over, and the result is boredom and deadness inside. And he was predicting the sort of social media age in a way that nobody else I've read did. And that's exactly what's happening, is kind of a simultaneous hypervigilance. Something bad's about to happen that it just wears you down, wears you out.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to have you back, because, the part of the plan was to have you on to do these sort of ask basic religious questions that everyone's afraid to ask thing.
Okay, well, we could do that.
And I got so seduced by the politics stuff. So we're going to have you back for that, and I'll prepare for it. And, because I do have some eggheady questions about the difference between Catholics and Protestants. And
okay, then we'll do a separation of church talk and state talk episode.
I like
we can do it.
Excellent. All right, Russell Moore, thank you so much for being on, and I will have you back, and we're going to get to all those questions. And thanks for doing this.
Thank you.